John Vance with Josh Blum and Doug Wehmeyer, and today we thought we'd get on and talk about a safety advisory that came out this week, and it's the importance of understanding and training on the portable radio emergency alert button, otherwise known as an EAB, during a Mayday. And like a lot of fire departments, the two fire departments I've worked at in the last 20 years, we had those buttons disconnected. We didn't use them because of some problems that had come up. But there was a recent Mayday in August of 2021 where a captain in Maryland was involved in a Mayday, and they talk about the button being pushed and 17 times that the radio transmission on the fire ground was not properly captured by the system while he was trying to transmit his Mayday. So they're coming out with that finding from the investigation that people need to understand the EAB, how it functions, how it's activated, and also how different portable radios are programmed and different systems are programmed. So Josh and Doug are going to talk about that with us a little bit today. We'll drill down on when you should have this activated, when you shouldn't have it activated, and how to put it in play in your system, and maybe some of the setbacks from having an EAB actually active on your dispatch system.
So one thing, just to start it, is Blue Card is 100% behind using the EAB button, but just as everything we do, only if you have a policy and procedure and guideline and you've trained on it and verified it really does what you really want it to do. Otherwise, the best practice is if they can push the microphone transmit button, that's probably the best thing that could really happen. The EAB button clearly is a benefit. We're going to talk about some of those things, but that's kind of Blue Card stance on it. You can't just take an SOP or see this guidance and say, oh, yeah, we're going to start using that. You have to really understand the whole system.
Yeah, there might be a lot of people out there that don't have it activated. Like, my firefighters, if you were to ask some of the new people, especially, what does that orange button do? They would just tell you nothing. They don't know what it's for because it's not active. So let's talk about what EAB button is designed for in kind of a best practice use in systems that do have them activated.
But I think the thing it's funny because you mentioned for your guys, John, it doesn't do anything. And we were, let's go back a few years. I'm in a bachelor party. We went out golfing that day. Guy from the military is in my car. I'm in my personal vehicle. Portable radio is underneath the seat. He finds it and he pushes the button. Because in the military, it was like a squelch button. Where I was working at the time, that's a predator. Like you hit that button, something's wrong with Doug Wehmeyer, they're coming to find me. And they're going to come find me. And then if you don't give a code word, your last known location is going to get an engine. It's going to get a medic. It's going to get a police officer because you're in trouble. So I think that the thing of it is what does that button mean when you use it in your system? And then Josh and I are in a position where we're in a department in a county that uses it, and we fortunately, I don't know that we've had it used the way that it's intended, that, hey, somebody's in trouble and they push the button and it's going to invoke a response. When I first started thinking about this, I'm like, man, you're pushing that button and it's going to light up the console, right? It's going to get the dispatcher's attention. It's going to give you access over the system. In the Mayday, in this instance, the firefighter could not get out, right? He, as you mentioned, the system was kicked him off 17 times because somebody else was talking. And I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is we need to shut up. If that guy's in trouble and he's trying to talk and 17 times he's knocked off the system, it seems to me that there's probably a lot of radio traffic going on that's maybe positive reporting, right? It's not, we need to have an update. We need to have a status change. It's not priority traffic. And this poor guy is in a fight for his life and he can't get any airtime. So I think that's a perfect opportunity for the agencies that are using these buttons to be able to say, yeah, that's what it's designed for, right? It's designed to put, if Doug Wehmeyer pushes radio number 12345 pushes that button, every time I key up, I own the system. Right, I take it over. Nobody else can talk but me. I'll kick you off the system. That's what we want. We want that person in trouble to be able to talk. The other side of me is, understanding the back half of where this thing goes is what does that do to the dispatcher? What does that do to the dispatch center? If you're Working in a community that has one dispatcher and you hit that emergency button, yeah, we want that person to be there for us. But if they're trying to dispatch other resources in the county that I work in, that's going to seize that computer, right? They're going to have to acknowledge that button and remove it. And if they don't, it's going to be an alarm going off. We spoke with the operations manager or dispatch center today. Every time that thing goes off, it hits CAD, and they have a problem with the current CAD system where the CAD's not allowing it to be overridden, right? So that alarm's continuing to go off the entire time. It also hits an alarm on the console, so that each dispatcher in that facility, and I think there's probably 20 of them between call takers and supervisors and the fire desk, the police desk, the fire desk east, the fire desk west, every computer is going off. Every screen is being interrupted. So if I'm in trouble, if I'm in the basement of a building and experiencing Mayday and worst day of my life, I want all those dispatchers, but I also want them to be able to help me. And if I've hit the emergency button, I'm probably not positioning them putting them in a position where they're going to be able to help me because they're continuing to clear the radio every time I transmit.
One of the reasons why we disconnected it several years ago is we look back, and out of 177 activations, not one was an actual Mayday. All of them were accidental, the way the system was programmed at the time. And these are these unintended consequences with the button. It would lock up the entire system. No one else could transmit. And it would also, at that time, because of the way the SOP was, send people to another channel. And I forgot whether it was the Mayday firefighter or the rest of the operation. So it would even start to do that. So that's why we backed away from it. But let's talk about some of the unintended consequences that people have if they don't either train on this appropriately or have it programmed in a way that's going to be complementary to the way that their fire department operates.
Well, I think one thing you said is the whole programming thing's a big deal. That radio is a computer and it's programmable. And, most organizations aren't using probably 5% of the real capability of the radio. And we definitely don't understand it, how it really works in most circumstances. So a lot of organizations have put like a 3-second delay on that orange button. Well, 3 seconds is a long ass time when you're having the worst day of your life. So if you're going to do that, have you trained on, you got to push that button for 3 seconds to get it to activate, not just you push it one time, and then it's going to give you the priority on everybody else. I did some research here in the last couple of days about this subject a bit, and there's organizations where they've programmed their mobile radio with inside the system that a mobile radio will still talk over a portable radio. So, if you do that, do you understand that? What's the problem with that? Companies that are inbound to the incident, or maybe still have priority. So it comes back to do you really know what that means? It's not just I can push this emergency button and I have total control over the radio all the time. It's what's going on with this radio. Who can I talk over? Who can't talk over me in our own region? Dispatch can always talk over the emergency alert button, which could be a challenge if the dispatchers aren't trained and the emergency alert button goes off, which it happens. People accidentally push it, or they push it for their own EMS detail and they need a police assistance or whatever. The dispatcher starts calling right away, county to command or county to whatever medic unit. Well, when you push that button and they get that alert, and I'm the strategic IC and I'm trying to manage a Mayday event, the last thing I want is the dispatcher talking to them. I want to talk to them. So, that's just another training thing that we have to understand. So it just goes back to, we just can't say, well, this button is going to be the answer and do all of these things for us. It's a fantastic option. And John, you said it. What's the unintended consequences? What's all those things on the back end that happen that we don't really understand? And I've asked the question of, if I push my button and my partner that I'm working with pushes the button at the same time, what happens? Who has priority? How does that stack up? What does that really look like? Does it block the other person out? And Doug can talk more about this, but in our region, we cross into multiple different counties all the time. And when you switch to their radio bank, what happens? Because your radio bank in your region might be programmed one way, but when you go somewhere else and you're on a different radio bank, is the radio programmed a certain way, or does it switch to whatever that programming is on that radio bank? So I push my emergency button, I'm in a different county, and it's supposed to just leave me on the channel and give me priority, but really it sends me to, some other channel, or, sends me to dispatch channel, whatever it is. So we really have to understand this whole thing. We just can't say, oh yeah, we're going to start using this emergency button. It's a training piece. And with training comes the whole sets and reps and exercising it and really working towards, can we make this thing fail? And this is one of those things I think that we try to make it fail so that we understand all the limitations of it.
And Doug, you started hitting on the dispatchers into things. What typically happens if you're a dispatcher? Because we know some of the unintended consequences in the fire ground, but let's start with the dispatcher and then we'll move back to the fire ground. When you're sitting at the console and that button gets pushed and it's programmed with, it's going to move channels and it's going to do all that. What happens to the dispatcher?
I had a great phone call today with our operations manager of our communication center, and he shared some videos with me that they use for training and the options that they have when that hits. And we really went through the procedure. And I'll add that his thing was push the button. He will figure it out from there. But when it hits, as I shared before, the CAD system that they're using in our region, there's an issue where it's essentially locking up, right? It's not handling the emergency button the way that it's supposed to. So CAD's going into an alarm, and then the console itself's going into the alarm. Everyone in the room who's dispatching, every dispatcher at a console gets those same two alarms. And they have the ability to, to end the emergency tones. They have the ability to acknowledge the emergency, and they have the ability to knock down the emergency. And he spent some time explaining that, ending basically just makes it stop on their screen. Knocking down the emergency means, hey, we talked to engine one. Engine one's firefighter has hit the button, and they're working on getting it reset. We know it's not an emergency. We're okay. We've acknowledged it. Knocking down would essentially acknowledge that there is an emergency. In this case, we'll say the firefighter from engine one's in trouble. The firefighter from engine one struck the button, right, hit the EAB, and it's got an active alarm. When they knock that down, it stops everything from occurring. But every time engine one, portable B or D, whichever I said the first time, whenever time that portable keys up, it now re-alerts the emergency every time. So every one of those dispatchers is going to get two alarms again. And then if that portable, acknowledges it, knock it down, ends the emergency, whatever they choose to do, I key my radio up again. We now go through the entire alarm sequence every time. The benefit, though, is that I'm the priority. Every time I key, I have a channel locked to me, a talking position locked to me. So you're not going to talk over me. I'm going to own the system. Just like Josh said, though, the dispatcher can get over top of that. In an ideal world, I think that's perfect, right? But as Josh mentioned, we have multiple jurisdictions in the region, up to six completely different primary dispatch centers, not including the small, one-town dispatch centers, but 6 regional dispatch centers, and their radio systems all handle that differently. Where in County A, I may lock on the fireground channel. In County B, I go to the Mayday channel, and in County C, I may go to a hailing channel. Well, where am I? And how are you going to talk to me? Right. So, ideally, if you're locked on the fireground channel, the incident commander's there and can talk to you. If you're not on the right channel and you hit your emergency button and you're locked over there, now we have to go find you. And the dispatcher should be able to tell you that. But again, in the heat of the moment of these things, we really shouldn't have to look for you. So, again, if we could program every one of these radios exactly the same way to handle the emergency button, it'd be great. What's the intent? Fortunately, I guess, right? Unfortunately, this emergency button activation in most cases on the fire ground are because a firefighter, has the radio beneath their coat and a tool or an air pack sitting the wrong way, and it struck that button, and it becomes the intrusion to the emergency scene that we're trying to take care of that. And I had that on a fire maybe 6 months to a year ago. I'm watching a firefighter on the outside of the building. Dispatcher comes on, Mill Street Command. We're receiving an emergency button from engine 76B portable. Okay, we get it reset. It goes off again. We get it reset again. It goes off a third time. And I'm like, okay, we get it reset a third time. And it goes off She interrupts the traffic again, comes back on, Main Street Command. We now have a emergency button activation on Captain 58 or Station 58A portable. Well, that's a game changer for me, because what I was looking at before with the guy on the outside of the building who I could see, now I have an interior crew reporting an emergency through an emergency button. Was there too much radio traffic that person couldn't get out? Right. So now I'm handling that differently. We activated Alpha, immediately took over the emergency that was going on inside the building. We're preparing the on-deck crew to go in as, to assist that firefighter with transfill air. And as all that's going, Alpha calls back. Hey, I have the captain in my hands. He bumped the button. He's trying to reset it now. And he turned the radio off. Well, just as everything's programmed differently, turning the radio off in this county doesn't stop the button. Turning the radio off in the neighboring jurisdiction, the neighboring county, does stop the button. So it's a huge issue. Like we have to get on top of this. I'm not saying you don't push the button if you're in trouble. We absolutely should, but where's it going to go? What's it going to do? And if I think that, oh crap, I pushed the button, I'm going to turn the radio off and it's magically going to disappear. Now we have a hazardous event going on in the fire ground that we have to address and we have to be on top of. And that's taking time away from searching for victims. It's taking time away from putting water on the fire. And I think it's getting us into the point that maybe departments like yours will just turn the thing off, because that's easier than sitting, 20 chiefs in a region down to say, hey, we got to figure this thing out.
But like Josh alluded to, that's a computer. I talked to somebody who just bought a brand new Motorola 8000 series trunk system portable radio, and it's $6,700 now. That's the latest price. And I'm finding, and I think that's the truth about our system, is we're not using that radio to its fullest capability. What are some of the capabilities for those listening that have no idea, that think it's like an HT1000? What can these new radios do? What do we need to get educated on?
Well, we got to catch up, because the next radio coming out looks like a cell phone, right? The next version from Motorola hitting the streets has a radio on one side and then has a data plan on the other side. It's essentially your cell phone, your internet access, and everything else. It truly is a computer. And you were right what you said the first time. We sitting behind me in my office right now is a low band portable that had 4 channels. One was repeated. Good luck on the other 3. And many times we were better off with, strings and wires and face-to-face communication. And now I have, sitting next to me, a radio that's, I think we have about 640 channels on it. I could talk to anyone from the Ohio River to Columbus. And honestly, some of our channels are statewide. I could talk to anybody in the state of Ohio. It's amazing. But with that comes complications. What else should we do with them? I don't know that any of us understand exactly what that thing's capable of doing. We have communication issues, and we work on using Bluetooth technology to be able to speak through, a mask. What a noble idea if we could ever figure that out, right? If we could ever get everything done correctly. It's an amazing tool. It's an amazing tool that we don't understand enough about.
I think one thing is when I think about the whole radio thing and just talking to, our dispatch supervisor and other people in our county that understand the system, the system and the tool better than I do, because they study it. We all have that, right? The people who are, ideally, if you push the emergency button and this radio is programmed and assigned to firefighter 2 on a specific engine, then it would come back and say that. But, far too often even on that, you see they push the emergency button. This is radio 127-946, whatever. And it's like, well, that don't mean shit. I mean, really, you could take it as far as my understanding is you could call in every day and the dispatcher could assign a radio number to a name using the emergency button thing, or just when somebody even keys up the radio. If the radio is assigned to firefighter Smith and they key the radio and it pops up, it's firefighter Smith. This isn't radio 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if they push the emergency button, it's like firefighter Smith from engine 127 has pushed their emergency button. They're having a Mayday. That brings it to a whole nother level of what information a strategic IC should know, the position and function of where they were working. It just helps them track right to this helping us to solve the problem, if you will. And I mean, I think that's just a pretty simple thing that could be done pretty easily, but it takes discipline and understanding the system and having an SOP and training on it and making sure that it actually works that way. And it's not something that just the fire department has to do. You have to have your dispatch center, on the same page. And if you're in a regional area and you got a regional dispatch center with 46 fire departments and you haven't gotten to the point where there's standardization and 46 different fire chiefs want 46 different things, that ain't going to work either. So, I mean, there's a whole lot more to it, I think, than anything. But it's somebody reading something and said, "Oh, I read this and it looks like this is the answer." And really, it's answering a why problem with a what solution is what it comes down to. So we have to understand all of the why behind that. If we're going to make that work and we want to use it, there's tons of benefit. There's no question about it. In our region, we do use it. We revised a bunch of policies, procedures, and guidelines and done all kinds of testing just in the last 6 months with it. Identified some other holes that we didn't know existed. I think in the last 2 days, we've probably identified a few more holes that we didn't think about that. What happens? What happens when two people push the button at the same time? What does that really look like? So I think that's a piece. And then the other part is back to what does it do with the dispatch center? And we got a little piece that we'll listen to at some point on that of this isn't even an emergency. It was just an accidental activation thing. And you can hear the frustration in this little radio clip of an event that happened today in a large regional dispatch center.
John, you asked before what's some of the other stuff it can do. And as Josh mentioned, we did a considerable amount of training on the operations of radios. You think that would be a boring class. We actually learned during this that personnel on the fire ground can key up the radio and then hit the emergency button. And we're actually sending off an emergency alert tone over the fire ground channel. And nobody, everybody in our county is blown away. And it was just one guy that happened to figure it out. Our dispatch center the same way, like, "Hey man, how did you guys do that? Because I didn't do it." And, again, it was accidental success that day. We pushed the button while the button was depressed. And now all of a sudden the incident commander has the ability to set off their own alert tone.
So the clip you're talking about, this is an accidental hit where somebody hit that orange button and they did it inadvertently.
Blue Ash unit with radio 137, go with your emergency. Blue Ash fire unit, your radio 137 is activating nonstop.
You can disregard that.
Okay, turn it off and turn it back on, please. I can't even do all the status changes right now because it keeps going off.
Engine 71, trying to get a fire ground with Medic 64.
All right, Blue Ash unit, your radio keeps going off. All right, utilize fire ground 7, Medic 64 and Engine 71. County to Blue Ash Fire. If you can just turn off that radio, that'd be great, since I'm unable to pretty much do my job right now. Blue Ash unit with radio 137, turn off that radio, please. Squad 48, acknowledge your run.
So you can hear the frustration in that dispatcher's voice, and they're trying to do their job. They're trying to get radio transmissions out, and they're not able to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of my point before, is that our dispatchers do a phenomenal job. And I think we do a very poor job of understanding that. We just want you to do you do you, I'll do me, we'll figure it out. And our dispatchers, I think, take a hit a lot from us. She's getting a little bit of an attitude there. I don't blame her, right? She's sitting there trying to do her job. It's firing her up at the desk. And that's the fear that I see when we hit that button. If we don't need to, we're bringing additional stress onto that. And at least one of the areas where I've worked, that fire dispatcher is responsible for calling all the automatic mutual aid. So if it's an out-of-county resource, they're going to pick the telephone up and call the neighbors and say, "Send engine 7. And then pick the other phone up and said, "Send engine 8. And then send engine 9. And we're doing that while that screen's firing up in front of this, if we use a situation today, in front of this lady. And you could tell, I mean, she's a seasoned dispatcher and quite aggravated by what's going on from some fireman that truly, clearly doesn't know how to use his radio. He or she hasn't trained on that tool recently, and that's a failure of communication. We could have the ability for that radio to do anything. If the end user doesn't know how to use it, how to reset it, it's a problem.
Then the worst case scenario, there's a line of duty death report after action that we've recently been looking at from LA County, where there was a firefighter following the Mayday policy. And these firefighters even have 2 different radios on different bands. They have a very complicated communication plan, even for a structure fire. So that firefighter activated the system on his Mayday radio, or the radio he was supposed to use. Meanwhile, the IC, who was still the captain, but operating out of the cab of the truck, never heard it. Never heard the Mayday because he was on the tactical channel transmitting at the same time. Meanwhile, inbound units did hear it. So inbound units are answering the Mayday, but not dispatch and not the IC. So that could be another unintended consequence with dire results.
Yeah, I think the whole thing comes back to our whole point is we can't just say we're going to do something. We have to understand all of the moving parts, all of the system, test it to its fullest. And, honestly, we should try. This is everything it does, but what does it not do? Like, where's the shortfall? Because the last place we want to find out there's an issue is when we're at an actual real event. I think the audio we just listened to is fascinating because it's on the dispatch channel. The dispatcher was probably looking at the screen like these units aren't even on anything right now. It's not like that emergency button came across the TAC channel on a working fire event. This was literally the dispatcher was trying to do their job just to send out units, and the EAB gets activated and it took over the system. And I don't know, it's however long it is. It's a 35 or 40-second clip. Every bit of attention from that dispatcher went to that to try to fix that problem. I think it circles back around to we have to train our dispatchers, and we all have to be on the same page. They can do so much for us, and they can really help us in a lot of ways. And we all have to do better with don't just leave them in a dark room talking on the radio. They need to be part of our response system because truly they are. They can do so many things for us.
Josh, Doug, thanks for being here today. Thanks for bringing us up to date on the safety advisory that I'm sure a lot of us got this week and putting some things into perspective on how to act on this and make it actionable so it actually does what it's supposed to do for our departments.